Bible Answers
with Dr. Al Garza.
All right, welcome back to another edition of Bible Answers Unfiltered and Black Belt Theology and Apologetics. I am your host, Dr. Al Garza, and thank you for tuning into our live episode here. So let's talk about what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be discussing in a presentation Jesus in the form of God regarding Philippians 2 verses 5 through 8. Now, this is important because this is probably one of my favorite verses to show Jesus as both God in the form of God pre-existing, as well as coming in and taking the form of a servant, and be found as a man, taking on another nature, as we would say, or another, identity as far as manhood or personhood. So he exists in the form of God and took the form of a servant and found as a man and became obedient to the Father. So this verse literally demonstrates, in most scholars' opinion, as far as even Christian scholars, the eternal preexistence of the Messiah, which we refer to as the Word Yahweh in the Old Testament, who then comes into creation as a servant, as a man and a servant, taking on that divine, that nature, human nature, from his divine nature, and of course becoming obedient to the Father, a servant to the Father unto death. And the verses that follow, obviously, is the fact that, for that reason, in verse 9, he was given the name that above every name and so forth, because of the reason of the humility that happened here. So we're going to be examining this from the verses. We're looking at them grammatically from the Greek. We're going to be using now. I'm going to be using today, and they'll be in my PowerPoint presentations. The most standard lexicon out there used by every scholar, and as well as a grammar. Everyone's heard of, if you have any education at all in the Bible, specifically in the Greek language, you'll find that the most typical lexicon used, standard across the board from every scholar, is BDAG. So BDAG has a couple different things here. I have right here BDAG's Greek English Lexicon of the New Testament and Early Christian Literature right here that I'm going to be using. I do have the digital copy from Accordance. It's very expensive, about $170 just for the electronic version. Also using the Greek grammar of the New Testament, also with BDAG and other Christian literature. It's the grammatical structure of the Greek. It's the secondary usage with BDAG for lexicon and grammar right here, for BDAG for both. So every serious scholar uses BDAG. If you've taken New Testament Greek, this is what they're going to be utilizing. Even Unitarians who have any biblical training reference BDAG, and they understand its authority. So that's what I'm going to be using today. And by using it, I'm going to be demonstrating how Philippians 2 verses 5 through 8 clearly show how the Messiah pre-existed and took on another nature, another form, and that form being of a servant as a man. Now, if we have people who continually to disagree with this view of how Philippians 2 should be utilized, they really need to get educated. I've seen many Unitarians online trying so hard, and these are people who, and it gets frustrating. These are people who are not educated. They're not trained in the Bible. They're not trained in the languages. They don't know the Greek. They don't know the Hebrew. They're just going on there repeating from people they look up on sources, or try to come up with their own conclusion, or even just using AI to try and come up with their answers. The problem you have here is that they will literally reinterpret. They will go against the Greek, go against the grammar, the lexicons, just to hold on to their false doctrine. Unitarians do this quite a bit, and it gets frustrating because they literally are deceiving people in the fact that they will ignore what the lexicons say, ignore what the grammar says, and they will just keep teaching false and deceitful doctrine, even when they're corrected, even when you point this out to them, even when you show them that these things are completely goes against the grammar and the Greek and the language and so forth. They still continue to push a false interpretation. They continue to do eisegesis day in and day out. Philippians 2 verses 5 through 8 clearly demonstrates, that's for me, that's the foundation for when someone says, well, where does it say Jesus has two natures or is God and man and all that? Philippians 2 verses 5 and 8 from the Greek, from the lexicons, in translation, that's who says it. It's something that needs to be dealt with because most Christians, even Christians who are online doing apologetics, and a lot of them are not trained either, they will continue to utilize, also jump around to other passages rather than focusing on where the foundation for the verses lie. They continue to utilize, other verses, other passages, and that doesn't really demonstrate their purpose or the reason behind it. So that's why I like to do my PowerPoint presentations, specifically focusing on a specific verse, certain words, and go through that as most scholars would, and break it down. Because once you break it down and you demonstrate the Greek, the grammar, the context, then really there's no argument against it. It's as clear as day. You use proper biblical exegesis with proper hermeneutics, looking at the language, context, and grammar, you cannot go wrong. And with this, there's no Unitarian that can dare refute the lexicons, the grammar, the context, and everything we're going to show today in the presentation, because it literally refutes their position, even in their so-called interpretation, which is really sad to say, but I've seen a lot of them try to butcher these passages, specifically this one here, which I needed to do. Now, I do have a number of papers and articles, specifically one on Philippians 2 as well, at my blackbelttheology.com page. You can go to there and look up articles. They're on there. I've got a number of articles, academic articles on there on different subjects relating to the scriptures and the deity of Christ and the Trinity. So you can go on there and download them all for free. Go to my academia page as well. You can go to my other website if you want to learn more about my links in my bio with the drlgarza.info. So you can go on there, get all the free. I also, for purposes of I also have mugs. People ask me about my shirts. This is Black Belt Theology t-shirt, Black Belt Theology mug, which I also have at the website. You can go to blackbelttheology.com and see it there as well, and hats and all that. All proceeds go right directly into the ministry. They don't go into my pocket per se, because I have other streams of income from businesses that I've developed and built that the Lord has blessed and allowed me to continue to do this without having to ask for donations. But some people want to give or support. Those funds go directly into the ministry, whether it's for, getting people to come on the show, or to expand the ministry, or to work on our Hebrew New Testament translations that we're still doing. I'm currently in the book of Acts, still working through that, and going through all the different manuscripts. So we are still working, but because we don't get enough donations to help, it does take a lot slower because we don't have a lot of the funds coming in. So we are a little bit slower paced. So if we had more donations coming in, then I can expand it and do things faster. But to do all this on my own, it's out of pocket for the most part. And there's some donations that I get go back into it. So, but anyway, let's get started here. I'm going to start going through this Philippians 2 verses 5 through 8. I'm going to look at this again from the grammar, the context, and of course in its proper understanding, how it should be interpreted using the lexicons. Using lexicons and the grammar behind me that I just showed you with BDAG as the primary source. Okay. Excuse me. I'm getting over a chest cold, which I have to clear my throat. It's been stuck with me for quite a while. So you might hear me clear my throat a few times unless I mute myself. But again, I want to thank you for tuning in. But and so let's get started with Jesus in the form of God in the PowerPoint presentation. But let me clear my throat. Give me one second. All right, hopefully that wasn't too bad. Okay, so let's take a look here. I want to pull this up in a larger screen so everybody can see. Now, if you have any comments or questions, you can leave them here on the side. I'll try and get to them after the presentation because I want to make sure I go through this and make sure everybody understands what we're dealing with here. And then, of course, we'll go back and see if anybody wants to have any comments. Okay, so let's let's look at this and let's begin with our slide. So again, Jesus in the form of God. I'll look at Philippians 2 verses 5 through 8. And we're going to be looking at this again in a way of breaking down the Greek, the grammar, the context. Of course, within the language itself, we're using BDAG, the standard authoritative lexicon and grammar we just showed you earlier. And that way you can see for yourself, this is not my interpretation, but this is how it's understood from the language of the New Testament Greek. Okay. All right, let's go here. All right, so let's look at this. Here's what it says. Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Messiah Jesus, who, existing in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant. Being born in the likeness of man and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross. Now, of course, I'm going to be presenting every slide this way. I'm not going to be doing the drop downs, like bring them in, because then I have to use share screen. This is fine. So you'll see everything up front before I get into it. So as you can see, this is a photo of BDAG on form, morphe, existing in the form of God. We're going to talk about existing and form first, because that's the first part, but let's do it form. BDAG looks at this in Philippians 2:7 as this is, look at this as he took on the form of a slave, equals expression of civility. This is in contrast to expression of divinity in the pre-existent Christ, although he was in the form of God. Now, this is how BDAG understands form and morphe here, as the same as form of a slave, form of God. So we're going to break this down because many Unitarians try to wrongly interpret this verse, even from the Greek. They have no idea how to read Greek. They have no idea how to understand this from the grammar. And here even BDAG understands this as being the expression of divinity in the pre-existence Messiah. He was in the form of God. Okay, this is in contrast to he was in the form of a slave. All right, so we're going to look at these highlighted parts. The other one we're going to look at is next to form of a servant. We're going to look at the word servant as well. I didn't highlight that one, but we will look at that from the Greek as well. So here we have morphe is understood as pre-existent Messiah, as well as although he was in the form of God. Okay, so this is looking at it as pre-existence. Okay, this is how BDAG understands it grammatically. All right, with the verb, let's start with the verb huparko in Philippians 2:6, existing in the form of God. Hein morphe Theoū huparkon. Now, if you look at the arrows here, Philippians 2:6, a predicate noun, who is, since he is. BDAG's placement of Philippians 2:6 under this category confirms that Paul is not speaking about a role Christ assumed, but a state he already possessed. The verb expresses actual being, not pretense or external resemblance. In many contexts, it does not merely indicate a temporal role or appearance, but a real state of being. So this is understood that, for again, a predicate noun, who is, since he is, an actual state of being or existence in the form of God. Pre-existence. This is something in the past where he literally was existing in the form of God. This is not like many Unitarians like to say and badly butcher the Greek with, a picture of a basketball or a picture of a shoe, but it's not really the shoe. No, that is not how the Greek is understood here with morphe in this context, specifically grammatically. And this is why, again, they don't understand the language and they butcher it with the nonsense that they present. This is a real state of being, that he was really in the form of God, pre-existing in the form of God. Okay, not some already possessed, or not already external resemblance or anything as a man or whatever. I mean, I've seen some really crazy interpretations from Unitarians, but this is a real state of existence. All right. So BDAG explicitly treats morphe Theoū in Philippians 2:6 as referring to the pre-existent Christ in a divine mode of existence. It contrasts form of God with form of servant and explains that the latter expresses Christ's humiliation, while the former expresses divinity in the pre-existence Christ, which we already just saw from BDAG, how it's in contrast to the pre-existent Christ. The entry even parallels this usage with ancient texts where morphe denotes essential identity, and BDAG does do that. not mere appearance or possession. So if you want to go back and look at BDAG and look up the word morphe, you can find in the contrast how it's reflective of the identity of whatever the appearance is for the form. In other words, BDAG understands Paul to be saying that Christ already existed in the form appropriate to God before taking on the form of a servant. That is preexistence, and it is divine preexistence. It's not just existing as something less than God. It is preexisting as God in the form of God. That is what BDAG just is stating here grammatically from the lexicon. And again, you can go back and even look at the grammar, how we look at this with the lexicons. Okay, so this is important. Now we're going to continue because we're going to finish this off with this. BDAG's cross-reference to the word morphine, which is a chord form entry, makes this clear by contrasting it with the latter form of a slave that Christ took on. The same word used for both, which highlights the real shift from divine to servile status of expression. In plain terms, BDAG presents huparkon, which is existing, as indicating that Christ truly and continuously existed in the form expression of divinity prior to becoming human, a state that was inherent to him, not something acquired or superficial. This ties directly into the theological weight of the passage about Christ's voluntary humility from divine existence to servanthood. Now, we're going to see this even with the word servant, with the word obedient. These are key passages as well, looking at how Christ became obedient, and all. Just we're going to look at this because this is what doesn't get looked at or broken down. All right. So with BDAG, we understand that with existing the form of God is existing as God before taking the form of a servant. That's what BDAG is saying, and it gives examples that you can go back and look for yourself, where this expression has been used in many different ways in other ancient literature as identity. Now, having taken the form of a servant, again, looking at the word labon, which is having taken. We make class here, and it's going to use this. He put clothes on, put on the form of a slave. This is the same. This is what's in contrast to each other. Now, it's basically looked at as having taken or having put on. As an example, and it says we make class here. He put his clothes on. That's a reference, and it's also with Philippians 2:7. Put on the form of a slave. Now, what exactly does that mean, according to how BDAG looks at this? And then, of course, the word servant, dalos, Christ, the heavenly kurios, appears on earth in the form of a slave. Now, it's interesting. This comes directly from BDAG. Christ, the heavenly kurios, which is the tetragrammaton. This is not kurios as an earthly master or leader. That would make no sense in context what BDAG is saying here. The heavenly kurios, the heavenly Yahweh, appears on earth in the form of a slave. So it's talking about, again, this is BDAG. This isn't me. The heavenly kurios, Yahweh. This kurios here is not referring to an earthly slave. It's not saying the heavenly master ruler appears on earth. This is the kurios of Yod-Heh-Vav, the Yahweh on earth. Appears on earth in the form of a slave. Again, BDAG. Understand this. So let's break this down. So having taken, again, the form of a servant, the lexicon explains that the lexicon explains this under the same semantic category as put on clothes, take upon oneself, and assume. That's the word having taken. Again, labon. It even knows that this is properly similar to put on garments, as we saw in lexicon, to put on the clothes, put on garments. This is crucial for interpretation. Okay. So lambanu does not mean to redefine what you already are. It means to add, assume, or to acquire. Okay, this is what it means. So, in the Greek word, of course, is labon. There's we can look at the root word. We can look at how it's used. Doesn't mean redefine. It means to add or to assume or to acquire. So he's adding or to assume something to oneself or to acquire a second nature, as we would say, which is the nature of a servant being found in the fashion of a man. That's what it means to put on clothes, to take upon oneself. So the spirit nature of the Messiah that pre-existed as the word took on the form of a servant by putting on flesh. That's why in John 1:1 you have, in John 1:1 and 1:14, the word became flesh, the word who was next to God, was God, in the beginning. obviously became flesh. He took on flesh. He put on flesh, literally from the Greek, having taken or put on the form of a servant, put on flesh as a servant. All right, this is what it means literally. So in Philippians 2:6, Christ is described as existing in the form of God. Then he takes the form of a servant, or puts on the form of a servant, assumes that role. Paul is not saying Christ stopped being in the form of God. He's saying Christ added another mode of existence, which is the nature of a servant. Bedag's treatment confirms this movement. Again, state already possessed. Morphin Theoゥwith morphe dalou, state actively taken. State actively taken. This is not a metaphor of role playing. This is the language of real acquirement. He literally acquired, took on, again, put on flesh as a servant found in the fashion of man. This is what he did according to how Bedag sees it grammatically in the lexicon, as well as how understood in its context and from the Greek. So again, he takes the form of a servant, but he also described as existing, pre-existing in the form of God, as Bedag puts it. Again, having taken the form of a servant, the grammar itself teaches Christ did not become divine. He was divine, existing divine. Christ did not merely appear human. He took humanity upon himself, putting on flesh. Again, John 1, verse 14. Bedag therefore supports the classic reading Philippians 2, verses 6 describe Christ's pre-existent divine state. Verse 7 describes his incarnational addition of servanthood. The verbs make the theology unavoidable. This is, if you look at Bedag carefully, the grammar books, the context, this is what the verbs show. That he was existing, he took on, or he put on flesh. This is unmistakable. This is something we need to understand, that when we talk about the pre-existent Messiah who took on the form of a servant, being found as a man, that's the nature of humanity. He put on the human clothes, became flesh, and tabernacled among us, as John says. This is Paul's theology. Okay, this is how Paul understands who Messiah was and what he did coming into humanity as a servant, as a man. The verbs, you cannot get away from this. I love to see any serious Unitarian try to redefine Bedag, and they like to say, well, Bedag is wrong in all these places, and we're going to show the others. Then go write your own lexicon, because obviously you are more authoritative than the most authoritative lexicon we have and grammar book of the New Testament. So go write your own if you think that you are better equipped to answer, or better knowledgeable, I should say, than the lexicons that are standardly used in every Greek New Testament class. Okay, that's what I got to say. Again, having taken Bedag is careful to stress that dalos does not mean servant in the mild or modern sense. Its primarily meaning is slave, a person who exists in a condition of complete subjection within a socioeconomic hierarchy. Bedag even notes that translating dalos as servant is largely a convention of biblical and older English usage. In normal contemporary language, slave and servant are distinct, and dalos corresponds to slave. So the lexicon defines dalos as one who stands in contrast to free and in direct relation to a master. Dalos does not act on its own authority. He belongs to another and lives under another's command. This is the strongest term for subordination in Greek. Now, this is where we say, and I make this clear, when people say, well, how can Jesus have a God? Or how could they call him the man, if he was God? Because if you just read Philippians 2 properly, all right, he is clearly God pre-existing, and then taking the form of a servant. He becoming, we're gonna look at the word obedient, but a servant. He became a servant, took on the form of a servant, and that's the humility of what he did. And that's where we define it right there, in the sense of saying that he is a man. He was found in the fashion of a man, according to the verse. He was found in that form of a man, the form of God, form of servant, form of man. That's why he is the man Messiah. He had to become the man Messiah, but he was God pre-existing. So this is where we get this from. Now I need to take a quick break here. Give me 1 second here. I need to get something real quick, and I apologize for this, but I need to go from it real quick. Give me one. All right, I apologize for that. Sometimes I got to take a business call from my class, and I apologize. But yeah, I had to take care of that. That was an important call. But as we were saying here, again, we need to understand that the contrast between what Jesus did prior. So when Jesus can be called a man because he existed as God, he put on flesh. That's what the Greek says. He put on flesh as a servant, found as a man. Therefore, yes, he is the man, the Messiah, Jesus, that he can be called. And that makes God, because we're going to see as a servant, as obedient to the Father, as that person who gave himself, which we're going to see, he can have a God, because that is the human side that he took on. This is from BDAG. This is not just for me. This is how it's understood. Now, when BDAG turns to Philippians 2:7, it takes striking theological observation. Christ, this is from BDAG, which we'll look at here. Let me see if I got this one. Yeah. Christ, the heavenly kurios, appears on earth in morphi Theoū, the form of a slave. Now, this is a quote from BDAG. So if you go to BDAG and you look up, of course, for servant, you'll find that refers to Christ, the heavenly kurios. This kurios, again, is a divine name, as I mentioned before. And let me see, did I actually reference this before? I apologize. Let me go back here. We got this. Okay. Yeah. So this is not merely a poetic way of saying Jesus was humble. BDAG ties this directly to verse 8 and to the crucifixion, noting that crucifixion was a fate reserved for condemned slaves. The contrast is deliberate and extreme. The one who is kurios, Lord, takes the morphe of the dalos, slave. BDAG therefore confirms that the form of a slave in Philippians 7 is the sharpest conceivable contrast to the form of God in verse 6. The hymn moves from divine status to the condition of a slave, culminating in death by crucifixion. This is not a metaphor for mild humility. It is a descent from divine glory into the most abject human condition imaginable. So again, BDAG says Christ, the heavenly kurios, appears on earth. That's a direct quote from BDAG. It's referring to the form of a slave. The kurios there is the tetragrammaton. Again, as I said, it doesn't make sense to say that this is referring to a heavenly master ruler. No, this is the tetragrammaton. So again, this is how we understand. BDAG is deliberately making this point, referring back to now. And being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient, hupikos, to the point of death, even death on the cross in verse 8. So BDAG defines, of course, hupikos, of one who is in subjection or being. Here's BDAG, Philippians 2:8, obedient. Now this, as a key New Testament example of this term in classical and Jewish Greek literature, hupikos regularly describes someone who is under authority, a subordinate, a subject, one who yields to a superior will. It is used of servants, subject of rulers, and those who submit themselves to a command. This is why you see in the New Testament, in the Gospels, Jesus being subject to the Father. The Father is greater than I, not better, but greater in role and position. He is sub because he's taken on the form of a servant, obedient. This is why it's important, as a servant who's obedient to the one who was sent. He sent him. He existed as the Word, sent into creation. The Word put on flesh as a servant, as a man, obedient unto death, subject to the Father. This is why all the New Testament discusses Jesus as being subject to the Father, even after the resurrection, where he then becomes resurrection, and he's called, God refers to as God as his God, my God, because he still has an eternal servant form as a man, even at the resurrection. He didn't give up that flesh even after he was resurrected in a spiritual glorified body. This is why, if you don't understand what BDAG is seeing, which is saying here regarding the context of Philippians 2, verse 5-8, you're not going to understand how Jesus can be God and man, in the sense that he has the nature, the spirit, his spirit divine nature is God, and he takes the form of a servant, a man, which is puts on flesh, takes on a second existence of, we say, nature, as a servant, as a man, obedient to the Father. And obedience is one who's under authority. That's why he can be obedient as a servant as the man Yeshua, Jesus, the Messiah. This is why you see it in the Gospels. It's not that confusing and not that hard if you understand the context, the grammar, and the language. So here we go again. In Philippians 2:8, grammar is precise. Okay. Genomenos hupikos, having become obedient to the Father. The participle, genomenos, having become, signals transition. Christ was not eternally in a state of obedience as a subordinate. Rather, he entered into this condition. Obedience is something he became in the incarnation. Cross-reference John 1:1 with verse 18 as well. So having become in the Greek, genomenos, become, transition. This means that he entered into this condition. So he existing as in the form of God, eternally pre-existing, the Word, and then he entered into creation in the sense that he entered into this condition of being obedient again to the Father as a servant, as a man. He became not something that he was in heaven. That's how the Greek reads. Christ was not eternally in a state of obedience as a subordinate. That's not what the Greek says. Genomenos hupikos, having become obedient, a state of transition in the Greek. This is where he enters in, transitions in this condition of being obedient to the Father. This is not difficult when you understand the language. Again, this aligns perfectly with the earlier verbs in the hymn. Existing, having taken, and having become. Existing, what Christ already was in the form of God. Having taken, what Christ added, the form of a servant. Having become, what Christ entered into, obedience. Okay, so the obedient in Philippians 2:8 does not describe Christ's eternal identity within the Godhead. It describes his incarnation role. The Son who existed in the form of God, we would say the Word who existed, took the form of a servant and became obedient, placing himself under the Father's will within the role of redemption. So he placed himself as the Word into humanity, as a servant, as a man, under the authority of the Father, and of course the Father's will within the role of the redemption plan of as the Messiah. That's what it means. That's what BDAG is expressing here in the lexicon and even in the grammar. That's just how it goes. So let's look at a conclusion here. Philippians 2 verse 5, it presents a single coherent movement, one that can only be understood when the Greek verbs are allowed to speak for themselves. Christ is first described as existing in the form of God. Now, this is eternally existing, a state of being in that form. Okay, so again, the verb huparko, as BDAG shows, denotes real inherent existence. Paul is not describing a role, a title, or an appearance. He is describing what Christ truly was prior to the incarnation. From that state, Christ does not seize or exploit his equality with God. Instead, he empties himself, not by ceasing to be divine, by adding something he did not previously possessed, which is the human form, the flesh. This is expressed with the verb having taken, we just saw, the form of a servant. BDAG defines this verb as the act of acquiring or assuming something new, putting on. Christ does not exchange divinity for servanthood. He adds servanthood to divinity. That's key right there. He does not exchange divinity for it. He did not give up his divine status. His divine spirit nature is God. He did not exchange it for that. He adds servanthood to his divinity. So as he's adding to his divine status, servanthood, the role of the servant, obedient to the Father as a man. He didn't stop ceasing to be God, because eternally in his spirit nature as the Word, he is God. He put on the flesh like we would. Put on flesh like clothes, and took on or acquired that exchange from servanthood. He adds servanthood or puts on servanthood to divinity, and then subjects himself, becomes obedient, puts himself under the will of the Father. That is what BDAG is stating here. And when you look at these words from the lexicon as well as from the grammar, this is unmistakable. Finally, Paul says Christ became obedient even to the point of death. The verb having become marks a transition. Obedience is not Christ's eternal condition as God. It is an incarnational posture he freely enters. The one who exists in divine form now lives under authority for the sake of redemption. Okay, again, obedience is not Christ's eternal condition. That's clear. Again, he freely entered. The one who exists in divine form now lives under the authority for the sake of redemption. The grammar is ambiguous. What Christ was, existing in the form of God. What Christ added, the form of a servant. What Christ became, obedient unto death. That's what we get from Philippians 2, verses 5 through 8. Unmistakable. It's unambiguous. This is what the lexicons in the Greek says. Philippians 2, 5, 8, therefore, does not describe the elevation of a man into divinity. It describes the self-humbling of one who already possessed divine status, pre-existent. The passage is not about how Jesus became God. It is about how the pre-existent Son became a servant. Now, I'd say pre-existence, the Word, who became the Son, became a servant. So again, let's look at this. We need to understand. Now, I might have gone a little fast, and I apologize, but we want to go back up here. We have, again, I quote all BDAGs on here. I quote everything that we need to understand here. BDAG directly correlates in the words of existing, or he was existing in the form of God, form of a servant, form, servant, obedience. All those clearly define the status that most Trinitarians always hold to, is that Jesus existed in the divine spirit nature as the Word. He became flesh, took on, put on flesh, put himself under the subjection of obedience unto the Father as a servant, found as a man. Therefore, he gave that position to the Father in his will for the sake of redemption. And of course, that makes Jesus, in that sense, subject to the Father's will, because he put himself in that position as a servant. And therefore, he can call the Father his God. The Father's greater than I. It doesn't take away from the fact that the whole New Testament talks about Jesus still in divine status. You know, they can still call him, Thomas calls Jesus my Lord and my God, which is a reference in Psalm as Adonai, my Lord and my God, as well as calling, Jesus saying, I have come down from heaven. Paul says that this second man is the Lord or God from heaven above. We have we have the passage of God would manifest in the flesh, or he was, referring to God in the context. All these things demonstrate. Now, this is why I used BDAG, which I showed you in the beginning, the lexicons that I have here, because BDAG understands what these words are referring to in their grammatical form in context of Philippians 2, verse 5 and 8. This is not my interpretation. And every scholar understands and uses BDAG and understands the implication here. So this is why we need to subject ourselves to what the scripture says and not our own theology. This is why I posted BDAG on here. Again, a leading authority in lexicon for the Greek and grammar. Again, here's the grammar book, okay, for BDAG companion. And of course, here's the large edition that I have. And I have the digital copy on Accordance. Again, expensive to have, over about $170 for the electronic copy from Accordance. So let me see what some people are saying here. I want to look at this. The 5326 mindset. Did you watch the debate between James White and Dale Tuggy on Jesus Yahweh and John 1 on the DT? Yeah, I watched it. Yep, I watched it live on my computer. Again, Dr. White focused on the grammar and the context of John 1:1, and I think that's what, for me, gave him the strongest argument. Dr. Tuggy did not address the grammar or anything. He went off into other areas. So yeah, I saw that. Let's see here. Jesus is clearly God. Yes, he is. Amen. I agree. Now here's interesting. What does it mean when Jesus says speaking to the Father, you have neither heard his voice nor seen his form? He's speaking to the leaders, religious leaders. He's speaking to them directly. I believe the context, again, the context of when you look at scripture, break it down the context. Who is he speaking to? Who is the audience he's addressing? What is he telling them? And he's telling the religious leaders, you have neither heard his voice nor seen his form. That's a direct reference to the religious leaders that he's speaking to directly, I believe, at that point. Unless I'm mistaken, but I believe that's the context, if I'm not mistaken, that he's referring to. It's not talking about nobody in the past. He's speaking in the present tense of you, who he's speaking to. You have. So look at the context. Who is the you there? Who is the you? That's important. The you will tell you who he's speaking to and why. These are religious leaders who are not keeping Torah, not following it, and they're being hypocrites. So always look at the context to give your answer. I've got some other comments here. Let's see. Yeah, so listen, there's Jesus, there's a couple things modern fake Bibles attack Christ's deity. In this verse, Jesus thought it not robbery to be equal with God. Yeah, I know it's not a great translation. It's something not to be held on to. So he wasn't trying to hold on to his divine status. That's why it says, that's why I broke down what the grammar and the lexicon say. He took on flesh. He put himself in that position. He added that other human nature and put himself subject under the Father. He didn't think of himself to be held onto that status of being God as the Word. He emptied himself, took on the form of flesh, okay, as a servant. This is important because this gives us the context. If we look at the whole New Testament, when I look at the whole New Testament with the humanity of Jesus the Messiah, I see of course, John's gospel, John 1:1 and 1:8 and 1:14, and I look at Philippians 2 verses 5 through 8, because other passages as well. But Paul deliberately gives you a breakdown of how Jesus was God, pre-existing, and how he became the servant and under obedience, and so that we just broke down from the grammar here. What I showed you, and I make this clear. Let me pull this up again real quick here. This needs to be understood here. I went through this. Where's my other one here? Again, yeah, we made class here as BDAG. He put his clothes on, put on the form of a slave. And again, the highlight portion tells you that putting on the form of a slave is like putting his clothes on. That's how BDAG sees it, as well as the word servant, dalos. Christ, the heavenly kurios, which is again the tetragrammaton, appears on earth in the form of a servant, morphe dalu, form of a servant, according to BDAG. Again, heavenly kurios, yod-heh-vav-heh, Yahweh. BDAG, this is not, again, kurios here is not referring to an earthly ruler. That makes no sense. Christ, the heavenly kurios, the heavenly Yahweh, appears on earth in the form of a servant. Okay, that's what it means. And again, I put that on here. Put on clothes, take upon oneself, assume the role. Okay, so this is, again, it means to add or to acquire, to assume another role or person in that sense. Christ is described as existing. Again, these are things I just covered. Understand, the verbs make the theology unavoidable. Okay, this is why I say this is describing incarnational addition, pre-existent divine state. Again, you can go through this. I went through all this already. Again, obedient. Again, under authority. The command. Again, the participle. Having become signals transition. Important. Christ was not eternally in a state of obedience as a subordinate. Rather, he entered into this condition. Entering into it. Okay. One who is in subjected, according to BDAG, and obedient. Obedience is something he became in the incarnation. So here's the most important one, I think, is expresses the Son, or the Word, who existed in the form of God, took the form of a servant and became obedient, placing himself under the Father's will within the rule of redemption. That is did not think it was something to be held on to grasp onto, or robbery to be equal with God, because he places himself under the Father's will within the role of redemption by becoming obedient. That's what it means. So again, this is what we find in all through Scripture. And I think this is important because when we see this, we have to clearly understand that Jesus put himself under the role and subjection of the Father. And that's why it says that he emptied himself. He, again, didn't think it was a robbery or something to be held onto or grasp onto, because that wasn't what he was doing. He was, again, taking the form of a servant, placing himself in subjection and obedient unto the Father as a servant in the man. So again, this is what we find. Thank you for the videos. Let me see here. Thank you for the videos. I've learned a great deal. My questions regarding BDAG is also I have with Logos and lexicons. How can we decide where to go with the options it has? I'm not sure what you mean by the options. As I also have with Logos and lexicons. How can we decide where to go with the options it has? You have to learn how to, well, if I'm understanding correctly, you have to know how to read a lexicon, because you have to be able to determine, like I showed you here, you have to find the reference, the word in Greek, as well as the passage in like in accordance. I can put the Greek word and find it in Philippians chapter 2, and it would show me that reference like I just showed you. So let me show you here real quick. Let me pull you off here. Let me show you. So if you look at here, here's the word again for morphe. And of course, here's where it says Philippians 2:7. So it's referencing Philippians 2:7 here. This is in contrast expression, divinity in the pre-existent Christ. So you have to find the reference of the verse with the word. All this is giving you other references, other backdrops for the word in other ways, but you have to find it here. I do it again here, Philippians 2:6 right here. And the Kenosis is speaking, of course, of the Greek. And then we look at the word here, okay, huparko. And I do it here as well, down here, Philippians 2:7, and this is what it's referencing. So you have to find the verse it's relating to in Philippians. So you have it, you're able to find it. So you don't do what is called a root fallacy and look at the definition of a word in a lexicon and then broadly paint that definition across every single verse in the Bible. That's not, I mean, Unitarians love to do the root fallacy where they look at a word, oh, this is what it means in the lexicons or the concordance, and then boom, that's what it means across the board. No, you have to look at the word and then find the verse and the definition within that section you're looking for. Like I showed you Philippians 2. That's why I put the arrows, Philippians 2:6, 2:7, because the definition that BDAG is using there pertains to that verse in the Greek. So you have to do that. You just don't read it and then pick what you choose and like from it. You have to look for the passage there, okay? What is the difference between using Strong's only and lexicons? Great question. Lexicons give they give more of a, I want to say, a very detailed background of the word, where Strong's just gives you mainly the root word and the basic definition. It might show a few places a word appears, but they just give you a very general definition of the word. Whereas a lexicon like BDAG would give you, non-Christian literature, other places used within Greek thinking, whether it's early Christian literature or the Greek thought and other past. So it gives you more of a detailed breakdown of the word and how it's used and how it should be understood and how it's applied in other literature as well. So it's more precise, as I just showed you, where if you get to a concordance, it's just it's like a concordance is like a dictionary. If you pull a dictionary, there's the word, there's what it means. Or lexicon says this is the word, the different ways it's used, different methods of how it's used throughout scripture in ancient times and how it's applied. And then in that particular verse you're looking for, like in Philippians, this is how it's understood. So even BDAG understands that. So you have to understand lexicons are I'll tell you this, no serious scholar, none, will use a concordance, Strong's concordance, especially someone who knows languages. They'll go to BDAG and other lexicons like this or grammar books that really break it down and give you the background, the backdrop of how it's used in other places, whether it's in non-Christian literature or other places in Christian literature. So that's the difference. And everybody supports BDAG. This is not a Christian lexicon. So as you see, even BDAG understands the words in Philippians 2:6 as referring to pre-existence, a divine kurios in heaven who became servant, became obedient to the Father, all those things I just showed you. So this is how we should understand the text. So here's a follow-up. Okay, so lexicons will save us from root word fallacy because of all the background it offers. Yes, definitely. It'll help you. It'll help from not committing root fallacies where you just, find the word and again, universally try to apply it to every passage. And that's what Unitarians do. I've seen them do this so many times and I've called them out on it. It's a root fallacy to take certain words and just apply universally. A lexicon, at least like I showed you in my PowerPoint, will highlight the red there to show that this is for that verse, this is how it's understood in that context. but it does have other meanings in other places and other usages in different ways. So you have to be careful with lexicons. Find the verse you're looking for that Greek word in the lexicon itself. Now I use accordance so I can search it easier. I put in the Greek word, the root word, and I put the verse I'm looking for, and then it highlights it in red, found in the lexicon. So that's how I can utilize it, find it quickly without having to go through the book and try to find it in the small print. Okay, hope that helps. Do I have any more questions before I call off? We're going on the hour here. Okay. So again, I want to thank everybody here for watching. I hope this PowerPoint did help understand that Jesus in the form of God explains how Jesus pre-existed as God, and how he took on the form of a servant. He put on the servant's clothes and human flesh, became obedient, subjected himself in the obedience of the Father to do the Father's will in the role of redemption. So there's something that he pre-existed and did in his creation in the role of redemption as, of course, the Son, the Messiah. Therefore, you can see all the passages where in Acts and the Gospels talk about him as the man Messiah Jesus, because it's reflecting of the role of redemption that he had to play as the servant, taking that form, taking that obedience to the Father. That's what people forget, that is why they can refer to him as the man Jesus Christ, or the man Christ Jesus, because of the role he took from leaving his place as being God in the form of God, the spirit nature, the word, and being, which we would say the second person of the word, being found, or taking or putting on the form of a servant, being found in the fashion or the form of a man, obedient, subject to the Father. Okay. So I hope that helps. Again, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Hopefully this does clear up a lot of misunderstanding of who Christ was before and what he did to become a man and a servant according to the lexicon. So again, I want to thank everyone here for paying attention and watching. And if you have any comments after, you can leave them here in my channel. Comment, subscribe, like. I appreciate that. It does help quite a bit. So again, share this. I hope everyone enjoyed it. And again, if you did, please leave comments and likes, because it does help boost the video out even more. But again, this is Bible Answers Unfiltered and Black Belt Theology and Apologetics. And I am your host, Dr. Al Garza. And thank you, and God.
Bible Answers with Dr. Al Garza.